Celebrating more than 26.5 years of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1379 with a release and air date of Saturday, August 2nd, 2025. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone. Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States, and podcast worldwide on the internet since 1993, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1379 of This Week in Amateur Radio. AMSAT submits a formal objection to AST SpaceMobile's plan to use the 70cm band for satellite communications. At the same time, the ARRL also has submitted a formal objection, and there has been an international response filed with the FCC. We will have complete coverage of the latest. There are new call signs, suffixes and prefixes introduced in Sweden and India. We will tell you what to listen for. Amateurs respond to the recent tsunami threat. We will have complete coverage. A Washington, D.C. area GMRS licensee files an FCC petition to allocate VHF low-band frequencies to GMRS. The league introduces Radio Alpha, a new, free, amateur radio history repository. The ARRL Events app is now ready for the upcoming Huntsville Hamfest. Radio-related fees are on the rise for amateurs in Pakistan. We will have this month's results from the volunteer monitoring system. The FCC is turning 91 years old, while considering a complete overhaul of the emergency alert system. And the world's longest lightning flash has been confirmed and has set a new world record. We will have the story coming up in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will comment on the proposed grab of our 70cm band in a segment he calls Using the Amateur Band for Other Purposes. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week will takes us aboard the Wayback Machine to 1922 to witness yet another cross-Atlantic test. In October 1922, the ARRL announced that another round of transatlantic tests would be run in December, with preliminary trials from the 25th of October through the 3rd of November. This time the test would include British, French and Dutch amateurs, and be two-way communications. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Salliers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studios just outside of Albany, New York, this is W2XBS.
And reporting from Dallas, Texas, where we finally just had our first 100-degree day of the summer, I'm Tammy, KI5ODE.
And reporting from our news bureau in Sandwich, Illinois, where I sit scratching away at the mosquito bites I just received on my 5-park POTA rove, I'm Jordan Kurtz, Kilo Echo 9, Bravo, Papa Oscar.
And reporting from our news bureau in Hilton, New York, where we're enjoying a few days of much cooler temperatures, this is George, Kilo Charlie 2, Oscar X-Ray, Juliet.
And reporting live from the warm and humid Space Coast in Florida, I am Ed Johnson, W2PH.
And reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
And reporting from our news bureau in Cortlandville, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from a relatively dry Troy, New York news bureau, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our amateur radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where in the garden the zucchini squash is exerting its dominance over the cucumbers and the tomatoes, but yields its influence to the towering sweet corn and the rodent woodchucks. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where, after a short taste of autumn, we're back in the heat of summer, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
Leading off our news for this first week in August, the public comment period has officially closed for FCC Space Bureau Docket 25-201, which reviewed a request by AST & Science LLC, or AST SpaceMobile, to use the 430 through 440 MHz band for telemetry, tracking, and command operations. This spectrum includes 435 through 438 MHz, a critical allocation for the amateur satellite service. The filing window ended at midnight Eastern Time on July 21st. AMSAT submitted formal comments opposing the proposal, citing the extensive non-commercial use of 435 through 438 MHz by amateur satellites, including Oscar-class spacecraft, educational CubeSats, and the Ares station aboard the International Space Station. AMSAT also highlighted ongoing interference caused by AST's Blue Walker 3 satellite on 437.500 MHz, which has disrupted InspireSat-1. The filing urges the Commission to deny AST's request and preserve the integrity of the amateur satellite service. The international amateur satellite community also responded forcefully. AMSAT DL in Germany provided direct evidence of Blue Walker 3 interference received at the Bochum Observatory. AMSAT SM in Sweden filed in opposition as well, and the International Amateur Radio Union pointed out that AST's use of 430 through 440 MHz under International Telecommunications Union Radio Regulation Article 4.4 lacks required sharing studies and would pose significant interference risks to amateur operations worldwide. As of the close of the comment period, the FCC docket recorded 2,283 total filings, a remarkable outpouring of concern from the amateur community. While not all filings were express comments in opposition, the overwhelming majority appear to be from individual amateur radio operators urging the FCC to reject AST's request. The ARRL encouraged its members to participate. The result is one of the most heavily commented amateur spectrum proceedings in recent FCC history. AST has maintained that its use of the band would be limited to early orbit phases and emergencies, but commenters, including AMSAT, argue that such limited use does not mitigate the real potential for interference. AMSAT emphasized that many amateur satellites rely on the International Amateur Radio Union coordinated use of 435 through 438 MHz, and that commercial systems should operate in bands explicitly allocated for space operations, not shared amateur satellite spectrum. The FCC's reply comment window remains open through August 5, 2025. During this period, individuals and organizations may respond directly to previously filed comments, clarify technical concerns, and reinforce the case for preserving amateur access to 435 through 438 MHz. AMSAT encourages reply commenters to cite interference data, highlight educational and non-commercial uses, and support the formal filings made by AMSAT and IARU. After the reply deadline, the FCC Space Bureau will review the entire docket record. This process may take weeks or months and may culminate in a proposed order or public notice. While there is no petition to deny window in this particular docket, stakeholders may still file additional comments or seek reconsideration if the Commission issues a preliminary decision. AMSAT will continue to monitor the proceedings and work in coordination with the IARU and international partners to protect amateur satellite spectrum. The 435 through 438 MHz allocation remains a cornerstone of AMSAT's mission to promote education, experimentation, and global collaboration in space communications. AMSAT thanks all who filed comments and urges continued engagement as the proceeding advances.
Several international amateur radio union societies and more than 2,000 individuals have filed their concerns with the United States Federal Communications Commission over a request by a U.S. broadband communications company to use frequencies between 430 and 440 MHz for a planned constellation of 240 commercial satellites. AST SpaceMobile was recently approved for the use of the amateur radio band on an experimental basis for a low Earth orbit satellite known as FM1, which is the prototype for the company's planned mobile phone connectivity from space. The FCC has assigned the call sign WP2XRX, which expires July 1st, 2027. The Texas-based company, a rival of SpaceX, is developing its network in association with AT&T and Verizon. SpaceX is partnering with T-Mobile. The Radio Society of Great Britain, referring on its website to its own filing to the FCC, said that the company's proposal for its constellation has stirred an unprecedented response from the amateur radio community.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
The ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, has filed comments with the Federal Communication Commission to oppose part of an application that would impact the 70-centimeter amateur band for telemetry, tracking, and command of satellites. The application from AST and Science LLC requests unprecedented authorization to 430 through 440 MHz for a constellation totaling 248 satellites to communicate with 5 ground stations using up to 5 channels with up to 256 kHz bandwidth. The formal opposition, filed by ARRL's Washington Council, asserts that the permission AST seeks to use the 430 through 440 MHz band should be denied because AST does not demonstrate need for telemetry, tracking, and command spectrum beyond that available within existing allocations. The filing goes on to highlight just how unprecedented this request is. The requested spectrum is not allocated for the requested purpose. The 430 through 440 MHz band is not allocated domestically or internationally for the requested space-to-Earth and Earth-to-space satellite telemetry, tracking, and command operations. As others already have noted in this proceeding, signals in this band from AST's current 5-satellite constellation have been observed throughout the world, including the United States, notwithstanding that the satellites are authorized to communicate only with 5 ground stations well outside of the United States. From the operations by the current 5 satellites, it appears that the satellites at times have transmitted continuously in the 430 through 440 MHz band throughout their orbit, not just when in communication with one of the authorized ground stations. This activity defeats the purpose of preventing interference in the United States by limiting operations in the band to ground stations distant from the United States. Authorizing an additional 243 satellites to use this band, which would result in multiple satellites over the United States at all times, would effectively usurp this band's allocated use. The 70-centimeter band is also used in emergency communications. As recently as early July, ARRL volunteers serving in the Amateur Radio Emergency Service made headlines for providing critical communications in flood-ravaged areas of the Texas Hill Country, allowing the 70-centimeter band to become overrun with telemetry, tracking, and command satellite operations could impact the ability for the amateur radio service to be used in future disasters. Telemetry, tracking, and command operations in the 430 through 440 MHz band are capable of causing harmful interference to radio amateur communications, including to amateur satellites operating in the 435 through 438 MHz subband, the comments state. The comments go on to outline why the application would be non-compliant with the International Telecommunications Union Radio Regulations Treaty. Reply comments to the application are due by August 5, 2025. ARRL will continue to promote and protect the amateur radio spectrum.
According to DX India and the Swedish Society of Radio Amateurs, hams who have made contact with radio operators in India or Sweden, or who have perhaps just heard them on the air, have been hearing these operators identify themselves with call signs that, until this year, did not exist. In India, newly licensed amateur stations have been assigned new suffixes since the 25th of June. Although the existing older call sign forms have not changed, new general grade licenses, which are assigned a VU2 prefix, now get a combination of numbers and letters. creating call signs such as VU22DX or VU29AR. Likewise, restricted grade licenses, which are assigned a VU3 prefix, are receiving suffixes of 2 numbers and 3 letters, creating call signs such as VU33ABS. Jose Jacob, VU2JOS, the Assistant Director of the National Institute of Amateur Radio, said that the changes are a direct result of ham radio's growth in India. He wrote in an email, "These new prefixes are a practical measure to accommodate the increasing number of amateur radio enthusiasts in India by expanding the available call sign combinations while still adhering to the country's internationally allocated prefix block." Meanwhile, in Sweden, amateurs who have received the new entry-level class certificate are identifying themselves with the country's new call sign prefix SH. These amateurs can be heard on 40, 20, 15, 10, 6, and 2 meters, where they are permitted to use a maximum of 25 watts of power.
A new question bank will be used for all basic amateur radio certificate examinations starting last Tuesday, July 15, 2025 in Canada. Candidates, instructors, and authors of amateur radio study guides may want to study the new question bank, which is available for download from the Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada website. Radio Amateurs of Canada has had a committee of 20 instructors and accredited examiners working to update and improve the quality of the 984 questions, 984 correct answers, and 2,952 distractors in the question bank. This is the first major update to the question bank since 2013. Still with amateur radio exams and in New Zealand, their new question bank will take effect on January 1st, 2026, so as not to disadvantage anyone who is studying for their exam now. Exam advisors will be notified in December to update their exams and destroy the old printed exams.
Amateur radio operators, including volunteers serving in the ARRL Amateur Radio Emergency Service, or ARES, were active in monitoring potential impacts of tsunami waves following an earthquake off the Russian coast on July 29. With more details on amateur radio operators' response to the tsunami threat, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this report.
That quake registered 8.8 on the Richter scale and prompted tsunami concerns and warnings around the Pacific Rim. ARRL Pacific Section Manager Alan mentioned AD6E lives in Wailuka, Hawaii, and he was monitoring ham radio communications across the state. There was some minor flooding in a few areas. It could have been worse, he said. Some of the early waves were measured at 4.5 feet. Waves continued this morning, but at a much lower level and difficult to notice by the naked eye, he added. The well-networked ham radio operators in Hawaii quickly sprang into action following the alerts. Informal VHF nets were held on amateur radio repeaters. Rick Ward, WH6FC, held an informational statewide HF net on 7090 kilohertz lower sideband for many hours, and there were about 57 check-ins. On the U.S. mainland, radio amateurs were also on alert. The Oregon coast teams appear to have been in informal monitoring modes so that they were readily available for activation if needed, said Bonnie Altus, AB7ZQ, who serves as the section emergency coordinator of the ARRL Orange section. The California Rescue Net on 40 meters was activated, according to Bob Turner, W6RHK, section manager of the ARRL Orange section. The net received some preparation reports from the San Francisco Bay Area and Santa Cruz, along with some maritime mobile stations with routine traffic. Orange County RACES checked into the net to inquire about tsunami traffic. Ham radio's operators are trained for situations like this. In March, operators in the ARRL Los Angeles section participated in a tsunami exercise, simulating their response following large earthquakes with magnitudes 6 through 9 that appeared over several hours, much like the real-world instance. And across the Caribbean, ARRL volunteers took part in Caribbean Wave 2025 drill in the same month. And you can read more at arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
As mainstream media was covering the earthquake and potential tsunami, Nexstar Media, the largest ownership group of TV stations in the United States, published an article across its station's websites with 10 tips for evacuating during a tsunami. Number 6 on the list was to bring a portable radio or ham radio, known as an amateur radio. Do not count on telephones or the internet to work. Stay tuned until the threat is over. The tsunami impact to North America was minimal at worst, and the alerts were canceled by midday on July 30. Photographs from Russia show widespread devastation, though, from the earthquake. The 40-meter amateur radio band is a popular choice for regional emergency communication net due to the ability to use vertical incidence skywave, or NVIS propagation, in which the radio waves go nearly straight up and are reflected over a limited area by the ionosphere. Many hams involved in emergency communications use NVIS antennas at your home station.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
It is the beginning of a new month, and that means it is time for this month's Volunteer Monitoring Report. The Volunteer Monitor, or VM program, is a joint initiative between ARRL and the FCC to enhance compliance in the amateur radio service. This is the most current activity report of the VM program. Technician operators in Arizona and New Mexico received advisories concerning 15-meter FT8 operation. Technicians are authorized to operate only CW on that band. An advisory was issued to a technician class operator in Kansas concerning FT8 operation on 40 meters. Technicians have only CW privileges on that band. A technician class operator in Nebraska was issued an advisory for operating on 20-meter FT8, a band on which technicians have no privileges. Advisory notices concerning improper wide signals were issued to stations in Washington, North Carolina, and Texas. Section 97.307 Subpart A of the Commission's rules states, no amateur station transmission shall occupy more bandwidth than necessary for the information rate and emission type being transmitted, in accordance with good amateur practice. A commendation was issued to an operator in Illinois for his work with the local emergency management agency on the W9ANL repeater on 146.970 MHz, assisting in efforts to restore damaged power lines and remove downed trees. 2 operators in New Hampshire received commendations for building a system of 2-meter and 70-centimeter nodes across mountainous terrain in New Hampshire. Before their installation, all communications had to be relayed. A station in Illinois was issued an advisory for retransmitting communications from a repeater to 146.520 MHz without identification. An operator in Virginia was issued an advisory notice for transmissions on 3.933 MHz after being asked to cease interference on top of existing communications and continuing the interference with unsolicited comments. There was one FCC meeting during this period. The totals for monitoring were 1,550 hours on HF frequencies, and 1,953 hours on VHF frequencies and above, for a total of 3,503 hours. We thank Volunteer Monitor Program Administrator Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, for this report.
A petition submitted to the Federal Communications Commission proposes sweeping changes to reallocate underused VHF low-band radio frequencies for the General Mobile Radio Service and Family Radio Service. National Capital Communications, LLC, also known as Mid-Atlantic REACT in the Washington, D.C. area, has formally requested that the FCC reallocate a series of outdated or abandoned frequencies in the 30 through 50 MHz band to enhance GMRS and FRS capabilities. We will bring you further details on this story as they become available.
The 2025 ARRL Alabama State Convention at the Huntsville Hams Fest is August 16th and 17th at the Von Braun Center in Huntsville. There's a full slate of activities happening around the event, and you can navigate them easier through the ARRL Events app. The app includes the event's full program, so you can browse and schedule forums, preview the extensive list of exhibitors, and find affiliated events. Those going are also encouraged to tap on the My Profile icon in the app to add their name and call sign, email address, and any additional information they would like to share with other guests. The My Badge icon displays a QR code of your event badge that can be scanned by another attendee or exhibitor using the Scan Badge icon, instantly connecting shared contact information with other hams at the event. The app is available for Apple and Android smart devices. You may also access the web browser version, which is optimized for nearly any browser or other type of mobile device. Tickets and information for the Huntsville Hamfest are available at www.hamfest.org.
The numbers are in and showing growth. 2025 ARRL Field Day showed an increase in both participants and entries compared to 2024. Here with all the details thus far is John Ross, KD8IDJ.
According to ARRL Contest Program Manager Paul Bork, N1 SFE, 4,369 entries, detailed 31,785 people taking part in the event. That's up from last year. There's a growing interest in ham radio, especially after last year's hurricane season and other high-profile situations in which radio has been essential, said Bork. ARRL Field Day serves as a great chance to get engaged with your local amateur radio community. The uptick in numbers may not be complete, and there is still an opportunity for a few entries to be added. Occasionally, a club will need to update their entry. We work with them to make sure it is correct, said Borg. Field Day participants should check that all required supporting documentation related to their entries has been received by checking the Entries Received webpage. If the status of your entry is listed as pending documents, then one of more required documents still needs to be submitted to complete your entry. Entrants may use the link provided in the confirmation email they received to upload informational documents or to modify their entries. Currently, 223 entries are listed as being incomplete. Updates or existing entries will be accepted until August 29, 2025. And if you're having difficulty completing your Field Day entry or have any questions, contact fieldday@arrl.org. On the public outreach front, final measurement numbers of the media coverage earned by amateur radio public information volunteers have been tallied. ARRL Public Relations Outreach Manager Sierra Harrop, W5DX, reports that the total ad value, AVE, of 2025 ARRL Field Day is $37.9 million. You can read more about Field Day at arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
We had a tremendous response from clubs and ARRL public information volunteers this year on the heels of Ham Radio Open House into ARRL Field Day, she said. The ARRL Public Relations Committee prepared resources to help the volunteers succeed, but they really took it to the next level in communities across the country. Ad value equivalence measures the amount of money that would have to be spent to buy ads in media and social media to replace the news coverage volunteers secured with press outreach. The $37.9 million figure measures only mentions of ARRL Field Day from January 1st through July 31st of each year. In 2024, the figure was $20 million and $18 million in 2023. Harrop hopes to see further strengthening of public information volunteers leading into 2026, which ARRL has designated the year of the club. Hams seeking to serve as an ARRL public information volunteer may express interest to their ARRL section manager. The overall growth is encouraging to ARRL. I'm very pleased with the amount of active ARRL Field Day participants this year. It's nice to see more and more people participating, said Bork.
There's a new resource from ARRL documenting the history of ham radio. With more information on this valuable new amateur radio resource, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, with this special report.
Radio Alpha is the ARRL Museum and Research Library. It is available for viewing at www.arrl.org/museum. Radio Alpha is envisioned as a Wikipedia-like project administered by a trusted group of volunteers. It aims to serve as a definitive repository of information, offering detailed descriptions and contextual data on pivotal figures, influential organizations, pioneering companies, transformative inventions, and iconic equipment that have shaped the landscape of amateur radio. Radio Alpha addresses the critical need for a centralized, reliable, and easily navigable archive of amateur radio's past. Recognizing the fragmented nature of existing historical data, this database will consolidate diverse information sources into a single, cohesive platform. Users will find meticulously researched entries, cross-referenced to provide a holistic understanding of the connections and evolutions within the hobby. A core principle of Radio Alpha is universal accessibility. Therefore, the database will be entirely free to access, ensuring that researchers, historians, enthusiasts, and the public can explore its content without barriers. Noted author, industrialist, archaeologist, and historian Chuck Penson, WA7ZZE, is the principal volunteer who crafted the collection. Penson has published several books about the history of Heathkit and the Titan II missile. For him, it's a labor of love and necessity. Somebody has to do this, said Penson. Lots of people are doing it independently on their own. Here's a website about the equipment I own, and here's some documents I scanned, and there's a lot of that. The lack of a central location to compile these collections is the root of Radio Alpha. Penson hopes the research library will preserve the data long after individual contributors have passed away. And he hopes that data will be preserved forever. ARRL has an organizational structure that allows it to take a long view of stuff like this. It is best equipped to handle a project like Radio Alpha. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
The platform is committed to being free of advertising, spam, and clickbait, prioritizing the integrity of its historical content and providing an uncluttered user experience. This database will be a living resource, regularly updated and expanded through ongoing research and community contributions, fostering a deeper appreciation and understanding of amateur radio's profound impact on communication, technology, and society, wrote Penson. Radio Alpha seeks contributors and volunteers to help develop the content. Hams who have a passion for the history of radio, experience in writing, or extensive knowledge about a particular brand or mode of amateur radio are encouraged to volunteer. The museum also seeks materials which may help grow the collection. Those interested may reach out to Penson at radioalpha@arrl.org. Radio Alpha, the ARRL Museum and Research Library, may be enjoyed at www.arrl.org/radioalpha or www.arrl.org/museum.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. Recently, I came across a series of strident posts about the injustice associated with a non-amateur service using the 70cm band, complete with links to discussions, spectrum plots, angst, and even incoherent outrage, all related to the notion that whomever allowed this user to transmit on this band was clearly incompetent. Except that this is probably not the case or the full story. So what's going on and why are people incensed? This all started at least 6 years ago. Since then, AST SpaceMobile has deployed 7 low Earth orbit satellites and used the 70cm band to communicate with them. Although in the trial phase there's plans for an additional 243 satellites, and there's at least one other company playing in the same space, Atmos Space Cargo. The outcry from amateurs is around the commercial use of their 70cm amateur band. It's an emotional statement, but what is the reality? Before I dig in, let's set some terms. Radio frequencies are globally coordinated because electromagnetism doesn't care about sovereign borders. This coordination is conducted at the United Nations by a body called the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union. Within that body, amateur radio gets a seat at the table from an organization called the IARU, the International Amateur Radio Union. For the purposes of the ITU, the world is divided into 3. Region 1, or essentially Europe, Russia and Africa, Region 2, the Americas and Greenland, and Region 3, the rest of the world. There's more to it. For example, Antarctica is split across all three, but for the moment that really doesn't matter. Of interest is that the band plan, the agreements that outline which frequencies are set aside for what service, might be defined differently across each of those three regions. To add complexity, each country can be granted exceptions. I don't know the exact mechanics of how this is achieved, but I can guarantee that there's lots of haggling and foot-stomping. Diplomatically, of course. If you're curious how I come to that observation, just look at the absurd list of exceptions associated with each band plan allocation. Further complexity is added by the fact that not all allocations occupy the same frequency range. For example, in Region 1, the 2-meter band for amateurs exists between 144 and 146 MHz. In Region 2 and 3, it's between 144 and 148 MHz. Within an allocation, there's the concept of shared and exclusive priorities. These determine who wins if two stations with a different service are transmitting on the same frequency. Essentially, a secondary user may not interfere with a primary user, and a tertiary user may not interfere with either a secondary or a primary user, and so on. A primary user can pretty much do what they want as long as they stay within the allocation and don't interfere with other primary users. As a result, the order in which services are listed matters. An exclusive allocation doesn't have to be shared at all. Between regions, these service priorities might not be the same. For example, in Region 1, between 430 and 432 MHz is allocated to amateurs and radio location. But in Region 2 and 3, it's between radio location and amateurs. So an amateur using that frequency whilst in Region 1 would be a primary user, but in Region 2 or 3, they wouldn't. As an added wrinkle, for example in Australia, that slice is, quote, primarily for the purposes of defence and national security, end quote, even though radio location is the primary service and amateurs the secondary one. As a bonus, amateurs in Australia have access to 420.8 to 421.2 MHz as a secondary service, even though the ITU designates this as fixed, then mobile, except aeronautical mobile, and then radio location. Although amateurs are a secondary service, they come after the Department of Defence, who are the primary users for those frequencies in Australia. Between 420 and 430 MHz and from 440 to 450 MHz in several countries, Australia included, the amateur service is explicitly designated as a secondary service, even though the band plan doesn't actually show this. If you're confused, you're in good company, since this tapestry of regulation isn't as straightforward as the 70 centimetre band is an amateur band. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that it's not an amateur band at all, except perhaps in Region 1 between 430 and 440 MHz, where amateur is designated as the non-exclusive primary service. Back to the blow-up. AST was at one time authorised to use 430 to 440 MHz for trial purposes by a regulator in Region 2, the FCC, the United States Federal Communications Commission. I suspect that at the time the Blue Walker 1 nano satellite was experimental and the approval made sense. You can argue that whomever initially allowed this made a mistake, but reality is whatever the regulator says it is, unless someone at the ITU objects. It appears that the FCC has since been attempting to make AST comply. Instead, with billions of dollars at stake, AST continues to apply for more spectrum, which they apparently originally filed with the ITU through the Papua New Guinea administration. It's unclear if the FCC has since capitulated. There is evidence that the new commercial AST satellites are transmitting outside of their authorization, euphemistically described as IARU uncoordinated. Ask yourself, how is it possible, or even allowable, that a regulator permits use of radio spectrum outside its borders, and what penalties and remedies exist? The ground stations using these disputed frequencies are all outside the USA. One of the 5 ground stations is in my own city, Perth, in Western Australia. I haven't noticed any discussion on this topic within my local community, even though this has been brewing for years. It does raise a bigger question. How is the band plan enforced? I mean, the 40-metre band is pretty much unusable in VK6 between sunset and midnight, thanks to the fishing fleet of our northern neighbours. It's been like that for as long as I've been an amateur, and I expect no change during my lifetime. How is this satellite fleet operating on the 70-centimetre band any different? That said, I cannot help but wonder, will the originally authorised 50 kHz signal every 8 seconds, not for phone calls to space and only for 24 hours after launch, or in the unlikely event of an emergency for telemetry tracking and command, actually cause issues? Or will it be an opportunity for radio amateurs to learn how to deal with interference? Speaking of interference and considering the allocated services, who is interfering with whom here, and what priorities and remedies exist? Recently, I talked about promotion and the lack thereof across our community. This is an example of promotion, and despite the uproar this week, a very poor example at that. Searching for AST SpaceMobile, the oldest post I could find was on the German AMSAT or Amateur Satellite Forums back in September 2022. By Peter Delta Bravo 2 Oscar Sierra, who's been very active on this matter. His original post was in English, but went on to discuss the issue in German. I only found it after specifically looking for the names of the organisation involved. Peter's post supplied links to many of the documents I consulted. Despite having links to specific pages, I found no search results for AST SpaceMobile on the websites for the regulators in the US, UK, Germany or Australia, and none on the ARRL, RSGB or DARC. The WIA produced 2 glowing news reports around the beginning of 2023 about this wonderful new mobile phone service. No mention of the 70-centimetre band. The only active discussions appear to be the German and UK AMSAT forums. That, and all the glowing investor posts. In other words, this is the equivalent of publishing the information at your local planning department in Alpha Centauri 50 years before the event, and hoping for a good outcome. As a potential path forward, in January 2023, the German regulator forced AST to shut off 70-centimetre operations whilst it was within radio visibility of Germany. I don't know if that's still in effect, or how and if it's being enforced. It appears that AST has been lobbying for the use of this spectrum for a long time, not just the 340-page submission made last month. For example, NASA made its first response to this satellite constellation in October 2020. It appears that the WIA responded 4 years later, but I have yet to see it. And this week, the Bulgarian Federation of Radio Amateurs, the ARRL and RSGB, added theirs. The IARU issued a statement this week too. The fact that we're still arguing about it over half a decade later is a good indication that how we're responding as a global community is clearly ineffectual. Perhaps that is what we should be arguing stridently about. So where do you stand on this? Should something be done about this, and if so, what? And more importantly, how? I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a stream to your favorite digital device on Spotify, TuneIn.com, Overcast, iHeartMedia, and wherever you download your podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX as part of Ham Radio's oldest ham radio magazine on the air, This Week in Amateur Radio. I'm Bill, AJ8B. If you're watching this on YouTube, the text of this will be included in the show notes. You won't have to remember calls, dates, URLs, or other details. You can just check the show notes. As of this Saturday, there will be 144 days until Christmas. Time is flying, so we better get started. The DX word of the week is zones. Where did they come from and what are they used for? The following information is from the CQ Worldwide website. Quote, the original article describing the reasons for the WAZ award was given in the 1934 issue of R9 Radio Magazine. The same reasons were given later by W6QD in an article which goes on to say that the WAZ, or the Worked All Zones Award, was conceived in response to the increasing ease in working the Worked All Continents Award. DXers needed something more difficult to strive to achieve. There was no DXCC award available in 1934, so out of the hope of providing a more challenging goal, the Worked All Zones, or WAZ, was born. The WAZ map was drawn along boundaries of states or territories. It was also drawn without regard to activity from certain areas. It was assumed that these areas would have more activity in the future, end quote. In summary, to make it challenging but not impossible, it was decided that 40 would be the number of the zones that the world would be divided up into. In answer to the second question, the zones are used for awards and for contests. We've already mentioned the WAZ award. When you participate in the various CQ Worldwide contests, the zone of the station you are working becomes a multiplier, giving you a better score. It just adds to the excitement and the fun. We have an update on the 3 Yankee Zero Kilo D-Expedition to Bouvet Island, February 1st, 2026, from the D-Expedition team. And I am really looking forward to this D-Expedition. Quote, earlier this year, we signed a vessel contract with Ice Tugs and a helicopter contract with Ultimate Aviation, departing for Bouvet Island in February of 2026. That seems like a long way off, but it's not. In August, we will start packing our container and complete packing in mid-September for all of the equipment going to onshore Bouvet Island. The team will meet in Oslo for 2 workshops to make this happen. Currently, shipments are on their way to Norway from the USA, Italy, and Bulgaria. Our equipment sponsors such as DX Engineering, ACOM, ICOM, RF Power, Spiderpole, and Rig Expert all make a difference in executing one of the most challenging D-Expeditions ever. We will depart from Cape Town February 1st of 2026, and the D-Expedition is scheduled for 36 days. We intend to stay around the island for more than 21 days, which will provide us with enough time to wait for good conditions to land the team and all the equipment. Our plans are sound and adaptable to the conditions we expect to meet. 4 team members have previous experience from the 2023 3 Yankee Zero Juliet D-Expedition to Bouvet. In addition, we've hired 2 external expedition support companies to assist us in landing and the camp setup. These companies have demonstrated skill in expedition support in remote areas, emergency evacuations, and safety preparedness in both Arctic and Antarctica climates. In a few weeks, we are paying our second vessel deposit in the order of $360,000. This deposit, coupled with other expenses, have resulted in nearly $1 million in payments to make this D-Expedition happen. With a budget of around $1.7 million, we continue to seek donations to assist us in this activation. Our team wishes to use this opportunity to thank all the clubs, associations, and foundations, as well as individuals who have already provided us with their generous support. Going to such remote places would not be possible without everyone's contributions. Meanwhile, we invite people to visit our website at 3yankeezerokilo.com and consider making a donation using the respective button or directly via PayPal to donate at 3yankeezerok.com, and that's donate at 3y0k.com, to help us offset some of our costs. Every donation helps offset the cost of the D-Expedition, and it is greatly appreciated by the team. You can follow our plans at 3yankeezerokilo.com or our trusted media websites, news sites, The Daily DX, EA1CS DX Information, and DX World. By the way, we're still seeking more operators. Those interested should contact us at admin@3yankeezero.no. So if you're interested and you can get 30-some days off, you should contact them. And if you need any more information or some curious questions, you can send them to me, thedxmentor@gmail.com. Each week, I try to focus on those entities that will be available in the next 7 days. There's so much data to sift through that I thought a focus on the next week might be helpful. Here's what you should find QRV when you tune the bands. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com and I'll hook you up. November 3, Radio Papa Rafael, using his Yankee November 2 Radio Papa call sign, is QRV from Nicaragua. Rafael says that he will be calling CQDX vacation style again until August 4th. So by the time you listen to this, you only have a day or two. And he hopes to, quote, work as many of you as possible. So good luck with that. Tango Yankee 5 FR is QRV from Benin until August 6th with DL1 BUG red operating. He's using CW and sideband on 80 through 10 meters. And you can QSL TY5FR via DL1 BUG or go through Clublog OQRS and LOTW. And I've worked Red a couple times. He's been very active and he's all over the band, so I hope you get him. A group of Italian operators are planning a de-expedition to Mayotte Island, FH, using the call sign Tango Oscar 3 Kilo from August 2nd to the 10th. Equipment will include 3 IC7300s and 3 FM HLV 300s, plus HD 500 watt amplifiers, so they have the equipment that they can be heard. They will use dipoles on 80, 60, 40, and 30 meters, a 3-element beam on 10 and 6 meters, a 3-element beam on 20 and 15, and a multi-band beam on 17, 15, 12, and 10. They will be active on 3.5 through 50 megahertz on sideband, CW, FT8, and FT4. And I'm looking to work Mayotte on a number of bands. I hope you are too, and you get in there and work them. Get them in the log. Malaysia's Independence Day, or their National Day, is August 31st. This year marks the 60th anniversary, and a special event station, 9 Mike 1957 Mike, will begin operation on August 1st and will last until September 30th, with a special emphasis on August 30th and 31st. The station will be located in West Malaysia, which is 9 Mike 2. Activity will be on sideband, CW, FT8, and the other digital modes on 80 through 10 meters. And you can QSL that operation to 9 Mike 2 Radio Delta X-Ray. Tony, IK7WL, is traveling starting August 2nd. From the 2nd to the 10th, he will be QRV from Burundi as 9 Uniform 0 DX. He will then move to Rwanda as 9 X-Ray 0 DX from August 10th to the 18th. After that, he'll move to Benin and Toga as Tango Yankee 2 Alpha Alpha and 5 Victor 0 DX from August 18th to September 7th. So quite a few African countries there. And he will wrap up his trip from Nigeria as 5 November 4 Alpha Tango Mike. Each year, Tony travels to Africa on humanitarian missions using his amateur radio operations to raise funds for those in need. He aims to provide food, medicines, and educational support directly to vulnerable children, emphasizing that every contribution helps bring hope and relief. Supporters can donate to his mission through PayPal, and that would be at paypal.me/TONYDR73 or Tony Doctor 73. E51KEE Steve, who's ZL2KE, from Rarotonga, South Cook Islands, will be QRV from August 3rd to the 18th on CW and some sideband, focusing on 40 through 10 meters. And you can QSL E51KEE via IK2DUW or Clublog and LOTW. A radio team from Finland will be headed back to Åland Islands from August 17th to the 24th, 2025 for a week-long de-expedition as Oscar Golf Zero Charlie. Their goal is to make between 30,000 and 50,000 QSOs. Operations will cover 160 meters up to 70 centimeters using CW, sideband, FT8, FT4, RIDI, MSK144, and JT65. The team also plans to attempt 50 megahertz EME contacts for the very first time, so good luck to them. In celebration of the 60th anniversary of the Proclamation of Singapore, 9 Victor 1 SA Hugh will continue to use his special Sierra 60 Sierra Alpha call sign through August 9th, and you can QSL that via Clublog, QRZ, or LOTW. Kilo Hotel 9 / Kilo 9 HEI from Wake Island will be QRV for a couple of weeks, August 8th to the 22nd, and hopes to, quote, add future dates as he can, end quote. Operator Jim has been told by the U.S. Air Force Communications Unit that it's okay for him to be on the air while he's there, outside of his 40-hour-a-week work commitment. He's taking along an IC7300 and a, quote, super antenna vertical to do FT8 and sideband. He says, quote, sorry, not very good with CW. I'm a long way out of practice with that mode, end quote. He may take a dipole as a backup antenna if he can stay within the airplane weight limit. His clothes and safety equipment for working take priority. He plans to put the log on QRZ and LOTW both, although he is working through that learning curve. Operators in Morocco are allowed to switch from the Charlie November prefix to the 5 Charlie 2 6 prefix during July 25th to August 5th. This is to celebrate the ascension to the throne of the country's sovereign, Mohammed VI, which happens on July 30th of 1999. 9 Mike 8 Alpha is now QRV from Satang Island, and you can look for them on 80 through 6 meters on all modes between July 26th and August 13th. If you're lucky enough to work 9 Mike 8 Alpha, you can QSL via 9 Whiskey 8 ZZK. This weekend, the DX Mentor podcast features two Ham brothers who are going to the British Virgin Islands for their very first DXpedition, and one of them's getting married soon. This was a really fun podcast, and I know you enjoy these guys as they prepare to depart in just a few weeks. So you can give that a listen on the DX Mentor podcast. If you're interested in DX podcast and YouTube channels, you should check out the DX Mentor Facebook page and subscribe to be kept up to all of the DX activities and notices. Please email me if you need any details on any of the topics we discussed or you have a question or a comment. I would be happy to reply, and that is thedxmentor@gmail.com. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB, saying 7-3, and thanks to my ex-whale, Karen, for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups. Have a great DX week.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Welcome to the 40th segment of Ham Radio History, a Century of Amateur Radio. Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our gratitude goes out to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for giving us permission to use his website in the production of these segments. Now put your feet up on that hassock and follow along with us in this next chapter of Ham Radio History. Crossings 4, The Reply. It had been a one-way affair. In the successful transatlantic tests of December 1921, North America transmitted and Europe listened, along with a lone transplanted North American. Now it was time to try it in both directions, though still not in complete QSOs. In October 1922, the ARRL announced that another round of transatlantic tests would be run in December, with preliminary trials from 25 October through 3 November. This time the test would include British, French, and Dutch amateurs. For the first 10 days of the test, American and Canadian amateurs would transmit and European amateurs would receive. Then they'd switch roles for another 10 days. In North America, transmitting stations would be allocated specific time slots after participating in a qualifying run during the trials. Unlike the previous year's tests, anyone can try out for these transmit slots. During the qualification trials, stations in each of the 10 districts, 9 U.S. plus Canada, would transmit during each of 10 15-minute periods between 9:30 and 12 o'clock CST. The district order would rotate in sequence on subsequent nights. While each district was transmitting, all others would be listening. Participants were to simply send their call sign during their assigned period. Stations that were copied at least 1,200 miles away would then qualify for assigned transmitting slots during the test and would be given code words to send, which would be kept secret and used to verify reception. European transmitting wavelengths would be broadcast by the ARRL operating department before the tests began. In the UK, the Wireless Society of London was organizing the effort, with Philip Corsi again serving as a member of the organizing committee. 2 special stations near London planned to transmit during the European period, including 2FZ at Bagouli using a 1 kW tube transmitter. In France, the 3 national amateur radio organizations formed a joint committee just for the tests. It was led by Dr. Pierre Corre as president and included Léon Deloy, perhaps the most well-known French amateur. Deloy owned and operated Station 8AB, which would be the main transmitting station in France for the test, using a 1 kW tube transmitter powered by a 25 Hz unrectified AC supply. Born in February 1894, Deloy was introduced at an early age to electricity and radio by his godfather, an accomplished scientist and astronomer, Camille Flammarion. After getting a receiver of his own in 1910, he copied nightly news broadcasts from the Eiffel Tower, call sign FL, and then passed the first-class commercial exam in 1912. Supported by a well-to-do family, he was allowed to install a transmitter on his father's yacht in 1914. He joined the French Army the same year, entered its radio training camp, and was assigned to the Eiffel Tower station, where he became the first person to call an American station, WSL. In late 1917, Deloy was assigned to the U.S. Navy Communications Department for 2 years, during which time he made many friends among American amateurs. Returning home to Nice, he became the first amateur to obtain a transmitting license after the Great War. He had recently made news by completing a two-way contact with British 2FQ using his 500-watt CW transmitter. The qualifying trials were just ending in early November when ARRL Secretary Kenneth Warner received a cablegram from W.W. Burnham in the UK, one of the sponsors of the previous year's tests, reporting that CW signals from the US had been received in London on his company's Burndept 3 receiver during the preliminary tests. Also, Corsi reported hearing signals from the 2nd U.S. District. Warner predicted that if the tests went as successfully as anticipated, ARRL traffic manager Fred Schnell would arrange for the first two-way contact between the leading participants on both sides, with everyone else maintaining silence. For some time, amateurs had been discussing adopting Greenwich Mean Time, GMT, as a way of avoiding time zone confusion, among other reasons. Now it was announced that the new round of tests would use it for all schedules. A conversion table for GMT to the U.S. time zones was printed in December QST, and 24-hour time was explained. Schnell reminded everyone that the dates in the schedule changed at midnight GMT, not local time. The back-and-forth tests would run in shifts. For the first 10 days, North American stations would transmit for 6 hours, starting at midnight GMT. The first 2.5 hours would be a free-for-all period scheduled according to district. Then from 0230 to 0600, the qualified stations would transmit according to a predetermined schedule. They would transmit TEST 3 times, DE, and their call sign 3 times, repeating as often as necessary or desired according to the announcement. These stations would also send their assigned code words during each transmission. British reports would travel back to the U.S. via MUU, the commercial station at Carnarvon, Wales, transmitting at 0700 GMT on 14,200 meters. The message would then be rebroadcast by WII New Brunswick, New Jersey on 13,600 at 2000 GMT. It had all been arranged by W.A. Winterbottom, traffic manager at RCA. Calls heard would be reported using a phonetic alphabet as Godley had done to French confusion during the previous year's tests. Evidently, everyone liked it so much that both the Americans and the French had independently devised their own alphabetical codes. During the second and final 10 days, North American amateurs were aiming for an absolutely silent air, with amateurs keeping quiet during the test periods, being asked to do so in the name of good sportsmanship. There were far fewer transmitters in Britain and France than in North America. Success depended critically on minimizing QRM. Call signs and code words of the pre-qualified stations would be kept under seal at ARRL for verification after the test. Reception reports would be sent to ARRL by wire immediately following each test night. Transmit periods were split into 2 3-hour periods, one for each country, alternating on successive nights. Paul Godley, hero of the first successful transatlantic tests, advertised amateurs about how to get ready and operate during this run. The Europeans had much better receivers than last year, and a few stations would be transmitting with several hundred watts. He had no doubt that signals would be heard by both sides, barring very bad luck with regards to meteorological conditions. To begin with, Godley recommended erecting antennas at medium height, about 50 feet, to lessen QRM, and speaking from experience, he advised that one should by all means put up a beverage wire if there was sufficient room. While the British favored a straight multi-stage RF amplifier designed for receiving, Godley favored the super heterodyne, but he cautioned that, if you were not already familiar with one of these complex circuits, you should use what you are comfortable with, believing that operator experience far outweighed the advantages of any particular design. He also cautioned against using more than one stage of audio amplification, since additional amplification tended to make the receiver noisier without enhancing signal strength. The receiver expert emphasized the importance of a quiet receiver, advising that the ideal receiver is one which is deadly silent during the period of no signal. Gassy tubes, while historically considered more sensitive, were inherently noisier. Reducing noise was also the argument in favor of simpler designs. In the multi-stage amplifier, noises are quite apt to multiply rapidly. To get 8 or 10 tubes working in a truly silent fashion is no mean task, but those who desire to use a receiver of this type should not pause until they have been able to get true silence, he added. The previous year, 9 amateurs in Europe heard signals from the U.S. Godley reasoned that, considering that they were roughly 1,000 real radio amateurs there, he did not define the term. Scaling up to the number in the U.S. and Canada implied that he should expect at least 250 North American stations to receive signals from Europe. If there are 4 times this number, I shall not be surprised. If they are less than that number, I shall be greatly disappointed, he wrote. Such was the challenge from the great Godley. We will continue next week with more of Crossings 4, The Reply. Included in this material are quotes from the following: F. H. Schnell, The ARRL Transatlantics, October 1922, QST, page 11. Kenneth B. Warner, QRV for the Tests, QST, December 1922, page 7. Who's Who in Amateur Wireless, QST, December 1922, page 61. F. H. Schnell, Why Not GMT, editorial, QST, October 1922, page 42. F. H. Schnell, The Transatlantic Finals, QST, December 1922, page 8. Paul F. Godley, Listening for Europe, QST, December 1922, page 33. With great appreciation to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for his allowing us to use his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, in the preparation of this chapter, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Hams embrace the story of one Catholic friar's ultimate sacrifice in a World War II concentration camp. This martyr, who became the patron saint of amateur radio, is being honored throughout August. Here's the story. In 1938, a Franciscan friar named Maximilian Kolbe began shortwave radio broadcast from his home-built station in a monastery to share his words of faith during a troubled time in the world. 3 years later, he was a prisoner of the Nazis in Auschwitz. On the 14th of August, 1941, he traded his own life to save that of a doomed Polish army sergeant. Maximilian Kolbe, SP3RN, was declared a saint by the Roman Catholic Church in 1982. and is considered the patron saint of amateur radio. The days surrounding August 14th have grown to be important ones for more than a decade at the San Max Church in Mexico. With the help of a homebrew rotating dipole installed at the church, hams from around the country team up to call CQ using the special call sign 4A2MAX. The presence of the saint is prominent at the church in more than just its given name and call sign. Some relics that once belonged to him are housed in a small museum inside the church building. The museum also displays some of the awards the amateurs have won while operating in contests with this call sign as a way to pay tribute to Saint Maximilian. The operators are on the air during August from the 1st through the 31st using all modes on all HF bands through the end of the month. The station's operating manager, Chewy, XE2N/N5MEX, said, "We want to celebrate what we love on the radio."
Calling its existing fee structure outdated, Pakistan's government has approved its first change to the fee structure for radio-based services in 25 years. More than 1,100 license holders, including amateur radio operators and private radio networks, are being affected by a fee hike. According to media reports, fees remained unchanged until now despite Pakistan's inflation rising by more than 700%. Pakistan's amateur license is initially issued for a 1-year period but can be renewed for a 5-year period afterward. The fee is increasing from 450 rupees to 5,000 rupees, or in U.S. currency from $1.60 to $18 for the term of the license. The change was approved in late July by the Economic Coordination Committee. The ECC acted after being told by the Pakistan Telecommunications Authority that fees no longer cover the expenses for managing licenses and overseeing use of the spectrum.
Amateur radio enthusiasts have developed a method to access critical hurricane monitoring data following a decision by the United States government to end online distribution. The data originates from the Special Sensor Microwave Imager Sounder aboard the Defense Meteorological Satellite Program, long used by meteorologists to monitor storm development. In June, the Department of Defense announced it would discontinue public access to real-time Special Sensor Microwave Imager data, citing cybersecurity concern. Although the cutoff was postponed until August, forecasters warned that losing this source of microwave imagery would hinder their ability to analyze tropical cyclone structures. In response, amateur radio enthusiasts developed a workaround led by SatDump Project's creator. The SatDump software project has released a new decoder that allows users to receive these transmissions directly from the satellite. Although official distribution is scheduled to stop soon, the satellite continues to broadcast unencrypted signals over the United States and polar regions. With the right radio hardware, details which are available online, users can interpret the satellite signal independently. The decoder software was built using a combination of reverse engineering and publicly available documentation to replicate some of the functionality NOAA had previously provided. Not all data channels are accessible using this method. Thermal data in particular remains unavailable due to the absence of reference materials needed for decoding. Still, the tool provides valuable insight for those monitoring storms during hurricane season. The decoder is still under active development and is available in the Verity branch of the SatDump GitHub repository. Interested users can download the tool and find setup instructions and ongoing updates through the project page.
NASA's Tracers mission successfully launched from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California on Wednesday, July 23rd, following a one-day delay caused by airspace concerns. Tracers, short for Tandem Reconnection and Cusp Electrodynamics Reconnaissance Satellites, consists of two identical spacecraft designed to fly in close formation. Their mission is to monitor magnetic reconnection events, where Earth's magnetic field lines snap and reconnect due to surges in solar wind. These reconnection events are responsible for geomagnetic storms and auroras and can potentially disrupt satellites and electrical grid on Earth. The Falcon 9 rocket lifted off at 1813 UTC and successfully returned its first stage to a landing at Vandenberg less than 8 minutes after launch. This marked the 16th flight for the booster. The rocket's upper stage continued carrying tracers to its target altitude of 590 kilometers in low Earth orbit. In addition to tracers, the launch also included 5 secondary payloads, including 2 private spacecraft named LIDE and Skycraft 4. 3 additional NASA-affiliated missions were also aboard the flight, each focused on testing new technologies and studying space environments. Among the ride-along NASA missions was Athena Epic, a small sat aimed at improving cost-effective integration of Earth-observing instruments into orbit. And the real mission, a CubeSat designed to study and eventually mitigate harmful high-energy particles in the Van Allen radiation belts. All 6 payloads, tracers, and its fellow spacecraft were successfully deployed during a 50-minute window, beginning roughly 55 minutes after launch. The Tracers mission is managed in collaboration with the University of Iowa with the goal of enhancing models of space weather and protecting infrastructure from solar activity.
It is time for this week's edition of AMSAT Satellite Shorts from All Over. On July 22, 2025, Earth completed its rotation 1.34 milliseconds faster than the standard 24-hour day, making it the second shortest day on record since precise atomic clock measurements began in 1973. This continues a puzzling trend observed since 2020, during which Earth has repeatedly broken its own speed records. The shortest day to date was July 5, 2024, at 1.66 milliseconds short. While day-length variations are not new over geologic time, the recent acceleration defies easy explanation and may point to changes deep within the planet. One leading theory attributes the shift to interactions in Earth's liquid core, which could be redistributing angular momentum and subtly speeding up the mantle and crust. Other scientists suggest melting polar ice and rising sea levels may be influencing Earth's rotation, though likely as a moderating factor rather than the main cause. Experts believe the acceleration may be temporary, and Earth's long-term trend toward slower rotation and longer days could soon resume. Next, we find that the long-anticipated reinstallation of amateur fast-scan television took place on the ISS on Tuesday, July 29th. Called Ham TV, it is a digital amateur television system developed for educational outreach, allowing students to see live video from space during school contacts with the ISS. The system transmits MPEG-2 video using the DVB-S protocol with a downlink frequency of 2.395 GHz and relies on modest ground station equipment for reception. Originally launched in 2014, Ham TV is housed in the Columbus module, but has been offline since 2018, pending equipment refurbishment and crew time for reinstallation.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
The 100th anniversary of the wreck of the USS Shenandoah airship will be observed on August 31st, 2025 in Ava, Ohio, where the ship crashed. The Cambridge Amateur Radio Association will operate Special Event Station Whiskey 8 Victor Papa from 0400 through 0800 UTC on 7.230 MHz. A special event certificate will be available. The USS Shenandoah was the first of 4 United States Navy rigid airships. It was constructed during 1922 and 1923 at Lakehurst Naval Air Station in New Jersey and first flew in September 1923. It developed in the U.S. Navy's experience with rigid airships and made the first crossing of North America by airship. On the ship's 57th flight in September 1925, Shenandoah was destroyed in a squall line of storms over southeastern Ohio. There will be a memorial service at the airship's crash site historic marker on September 3rd, 2025.
The YASME Foundation has awarded a supporting grant to cover the cost of amateur radio license exams for youth in Malawi, Africa. 9 people have participated in exams this past week, 5 for new licenses and 4 for upgrades. The YASME Foundation Board is also acknowledging the ongoing work of amateur radio operator Don Jones, K6ZO, for promoting amateur radio in Malawi under his leadership. The Hack DC Amateur Radio Club initiated the Maui Project, which has helped license several new amateur radio operators in Malawi, the Comoros, and Uganda. The project now has a permanent home, the Jeffrey Daw Memorial Foundation, established to honor former club president Jeffrey Don, KB3ZUK, Silent Key. The Don Foundation's website provides additional information about its programs, projects, and how to send donations. Jones is in his 2nd year living in Malawi, 8 months out of the year, helping young people get their amateur license. "It's fun," said Jones. "There is no licensing program here, but with the help of YASME and DX Engineering, we can give these kids opportunities they would have never had. This project is successful due to the overwhelming support from the amateur radio community around the world." Jones added that there are now 11 youths who have licenses, including a 12-year-old girl who just passed her test. He hopes that 19 or 20 high school students will soon be licensed and an amateur station added to their school. Plans are underway to bring some of the new hams to the 2026 Hamvention. Malawi is a landlocked country in southeastern Africa, bordered by Zambia to the west, Tanzania to the north and northeast, and Mozambique to the east, south, and southwest. It is considered to be one of the least developed countries in the world, with a population over 22 million, approximately 85% of whom live in rural areas.
Dr. Ulrich L. Rode, N1UL, has been awarded the Bavarian Order of Merit. Rode is an honorary member of the Bavarian Academy of Sciences. Bavarian Minister and President Dr. Markus Söder said the award is considered a sign of grateful recognition for outstanding scientific achievements and services to the Free State of Bavaria and the Bavarian people. Bavaria is a constituent part of the Federal Republic of Germany. Through his life's work, Ulrich L. Rode serves as an outstanding scientific ambassador for Bavaria around the world. He has rendered exceptional services to the Free State of Bavaria and its reputation as a center of science through his scientific and social contributions, said Söder. "I accept the award with gratitude and respect," said Rode. "I am very pleased about the recognition of my life's work that this award represents." Rode is an ARRL member and helped author the ARRL Handbook.
The 28th International Lighthouse Lightship Weekend will take place August 16 at 0001 UTC until August 17 at 2400 UTC. Started in 1993 by Air Amateur Radio Group in Scotland as the Northern Lighthouse Activity Weekend, now coincides with many countries, honoring the lighthouses each August. The event is not a contest and participation is free. Each station's operators decide on which bands and nodes they'll operate, and there's no restrictions on antennas or power, and each station must be operated in compliance with your operator's license. Amateur radio operators are encouraged to enjoy the event and make as many contacts as possible. In the United States, Fire Island Lighthouse, W2GSB, in Babylon, New York, and the Eagle Harbor Lighthouse, K8L, in Eagle Harbor, Michigan, will be operating special event stations. Complete information, including registration guidelines and a current list of participants, can be found at International Lighthouse Lightship Weekend.
A new Earth-observing satellite developed jointly by NASA and the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, is set to enhance global monitoring of land and ice. The NASA-ISRO Synthetic Aperture Radar mission, known as NISAR, will track surface changes with unprecedented accuracy, helping scientists and decision-makers address challenges ranging from natural disasters to food security. NISAR is the first collaborative satellite mission of its kind between the two space agencies. It combines NASA's L-band radar with ISRO's S-band radar to produce high-resolution measurements of Earth's surface, regardless of weather or lighting conditions. This dual radar approach will allow scientists to detect subtle shifts in glaciers, faults, wetlands, and farmland, and to develop a deeper understanding of how these systems evolve over time. The satellite's radar reflector antenna spans 39 feet and will scan Earth's surface every 12 days. The system is capable of detecting ground movement as small as fractions of an inch, providing critical insight into potential earthquakes, landslides, and volcanic activity. NISAR will also monitor infrastructure like dams and levees, alerting engineers to changes in surrounding land that may affect structural stability. Data collected by NISAR will be processed and distributed via cloud platforms with open access for researchers and governments around the world. Over its primary mission, NISAR is expected to generate about 80 terabytes of data per day, making it the most data-intensive Earth science satellite ever launched by NASA or ISRO. This data will support everything from climate studies to emergency response planning. The mission also plays a vital role in monitoring ecosystems and agricultural resources. With its ability to penetrate forest canopies and monitor moisture levels in soil and vegetation, NISAR will contribute to studies of forest health, crop yields, and carbon cycling. Its global coverage will be especially valuable in regions that lack consistent satellite monitoring. Engineers from California and India collaborated to integrate and test the satellite, which represents a new chapter in U.S.-India civil space cooperation. NISAR continues the legacy of synthetic aperture radar missions while expanding their reach and resolution on a global scale.
The FCC has issued a notice of illegal pirate radio broadcasting to a rural ranch in Washington state, even as a high-stakes constitutional challenge out of South Florida is testing the FCC's authority to punish unlicensed radio broadcasters. The Three Brothers Ranch LLC, the owners of a property in Quinault, Washington, are currently on the hook for unauthorized transmissions coming from a property located on South Shore Road. The signal was first identified on May 7 by FCC Enforcement Bureau agents based out of Portland. Under the Pirate Act, the FCC can hold property owners responsible for unlicensed operations, even if they are not the broadcaster. The Commission is continuing its enforcement initiatives, while a Miami area man has filed a petition for reconsideration against the agency's $1 million forfeiture order for his pirate broadcast. Citing a recent Supreme Court ruling that limits the power of the federal agencies to impose civil fines without judicial review, Fabrice Polynice argues the FCC's long-standing forfeiture procedure is unconstitutional. At the heart of his challenge is the SEC versus Jarchese decision, which held that administrative agencies cannot levy punitive fines in suits at common law without the option of a jury trial. Policy claims that the FCC's administration process, which allows only a written reply and no hearing, fails to meet these constitutional standards. A white paper submitted with the petition by former FCC Deputy General Counsel Peter Karangia supports that interpretation, warning that most FCC forfeiture actions may no longer hold up in court without reform. The Commission has not yet responded to Police's petition, but is unlikely to grant reconsideration.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. A quick update to the story from last week about the request of AST to use the 430 to 440 megahertz band. I did a quick look at the FCC website for all the filed comments. Besides AMSAT and ARIS, I found these radio amateur societies: Germany, Sweden, Switzerland, Finland, Serbia, Spain, Greece, Slovenia, France, Cyprus, as well as the IARU, all filing comments. I even found an objection by T-Mobile. I was told that the ARRL also filed a comment. I must have missed it scrolling through the some 2,300 comments. If we let one company encroach on our spectrum, it opens the floodgates for others to enter. The Tevel 2 family of satellites currently has only number 3 working. The other 8 have not been commissioned yet. It is not known when the others will turn on for amateur use. If you are tracking them, all use the same frequencies, 145.970 MHz up and 436.400 MHz down, both FM. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's solar weather and propagation forecast report. Solar activity continues to be at low levels. Region 4153 remained the largest group on the visible disk and produced a C1.5 flare on July 28, but no Earth-directed coronal mass ejections were observed in available coronagraph imagery. Region 4155, which had shown signs of development in previous periods, underwent decay in its trailing spots, losing rudimentary penumbra while producing C-class flares to include a C4.7 on July 30. Region 4161 produced a few C-class flares as it experienced decay in its trailing spots as well. Region 4165 continued to rotate into view on the eastern limb, revealing a trailing spot, and Region 4166 rapidly emerged and was numbered. A new single spot was noted just south of AR 4161, but remains unnumbered at this time. A narrow coronal mass ejection, originating from an eruption in the vicinity of AR 4157, was observed in GOES imagery on July 30. Modeling efforts suggest that the bulk of the material is likely ahead of Earth's orbit, but may give glancing influences on August 2. The solar wind parameters reflected negative polarity coronal hole high-speed stream influences. Enhanced solar wind parameters are expected to continue through July 31 as coronal hole high-speed stream effects persist before beginning to wane on August 1. An additional disturbance cannot be ruled out for August 2, due to the aforementioned July 30 coronal mass ejection event originating from the vicinity of AR 4157. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Karl Lewetzelschwab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the VOCAP Online for Ham Radio website.
Just ahead in radio sport this week, on August 1st, the NCCC Sprint, that's CW. August 2nd and 3rd, the 1010 International Summer Contest, single sideband and phone. The North American QSO Party, CW. And the ARRL 222 MHz Up and Down Distance Contest, that's CW, phone and digital. And remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions on August 2nd, the ARRL Maine State Convention and Hamfest, that's in Augusta, Maine. August 3rd, the SVARC Berryville Hamfest, hosting the ARRL Roanoke Division Convention, that's in Berryville, Virginia. On August 9th, the ARRL Idaho State Convention, that's in Post Falls, Idaho. And on August 16th and 17th, the Huntsville Hamfest, hosting the ARRL Alabama State Convention in Huntsville, Alabama. And remember to search the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find events in your area.
This month, a significant milestone in American communication history was achieved as President Franklin D. Roosevelt announced the first appointments to the newly established Federal Communications Commission. This landmark event, occurring 91 years ago, marks the creation of an agency tasked with overseeing the rapidly evolving landscape of communications in the United States, a move hailed as a bold step toward regulating an industry that was vital to the nation's economic and social fabric. The FCC was created under the Communications Act of 1934, signed into law by President Roosevelt on June 19, 1934. This legislation consolidated the regulatory functions previously handled by the Federal Radio Commission, the Interstate Commerce Commission, and other bodies into a single, independent agency. The FCC's mandate is to regulate interstate and international communications by radio, television, wire, satellite, and cable, ensuring that the public interest is served. The agency oversees licensing for broadcasters, promotes competition in telecommunications, protects consumers, and ensures access to communication services across the nation. In its early days, the FCC focused heavily on managing the burgeoning radio industry, setting standards for frequency allocation, and preventing signal interference. On this historic day, President Roosevelt appointed 7 commissioners to lead the FCC, with Eugene O. Sykes named as the first chairman. Sykes, a former judge and member of the Federal Radio Commission, brought experience in radio regulation to the role. The other appointees included a mix of legal, technical, and business experts, reflecting the diverse challenges the agency would face. Their appointments were met with optimism as the nation grappled with the rapid growth of radio broadcasting and the need for standardized oversight. The creation of the FCC and its first appointments came at a pivotal moment. The 1930s saw radio become a central part of American life, with millions tuning in for news, entertainment, and cultural programs. However, the airwaves were chaotic, with overlapping signals and unregulated stations causing widespread interference. The FCC's formation was a direct response to these challenges, aiming to bring order and fairness to the communications sector.
The ARRL Board of Directors met on July 18th and 19th, 2025, and accomplished work on behalf of members. Some of the highlights of the meeting include establishment of a 10-band DXCC award, review of the status of ARRL's Washington advocacy on behalf of amateur radio, creation of a new ARRL museum and research library called Radio Alpha, found at www.arrl.org/Radio Alpha. Action on the report and recommendations of the Special Committee on Bylaw 46 that was published in December 2024 and first considered by the Board in January. Establishment of 2026 as the Year of the Club to honor and support the work of ARRL-affiliated radio clubs. And approval for a year-long celebration in 2026 to mark the semi-quincentennial of the United States, including a commemorative ARRL US 250 Worked All States Award for contacts made during the year. Read more about the actions taken by the ARRL Board of Directors in the member bulletin that was emailed earlier this week.
The Federal Communications Commission is preparing for 2 major initiatives: the return of auctioning spectrum licenses and a top-to-bottom assessment of the nation's emergency alert system. The FCC's ability to auction spectrum had expired but was restored in a bill signed by President Donald Trump on July 4th. The frequencies eyed for auction are in the so-called AWS-3 band for advanced wireless services. These are unused microwave frequencies that have been allocated for 5G commercial wireless. The auctions would be the first of their kind in the United States in 4 years. The FCC has also prioritized a system-wide reevaluation of the nation's emergency communications technology. The emergency alert system makes use of radio and TV, while the wireless emergency alerts utilize mobile devices. The FCC is set to vote on moving ahead with this system-wide assessment at its August 7th meeting, with an eye toward pushing for upgraded technologies.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
In India, law enforcement personnel from the remote region of Darjeeling and the coastal area of the Sundarbans joined with police in Kolkata for a one-day session on how amateur radio can assist them when conventional communication systems are compromised. The regulations governing radio and the technical side of operating were covered in a one-day session held on Friday, July 25th in Kolkata. The training was conducted by Jayanta Baidiya, VU2TFR, Arnab Roy Chowdhury, VU2TFT, and Ambarish Nag Biswas, VU2JFA, all from the West Bengal Radio Club. Remote regions of India can be particularly challenged when natural disasters strike, but even in the heart of a city like Kolkata, law enforcement has concerns about how useful the radios are. The Hams noted that high-rise buildings, such as those under construction in Kolkata, can interfere with the wireless frequencies used by the police radios. The seminar is the latest to be organized and hosted by the club, which often does such training for law enforcement personnel.
HOTA, an awards program that originated with the Bokaru Amateur Radio Club in South Africa, has its origins as heliographs on the air. The original concept, credited to Janie Smith, Zulu Sierra 3, Charlie Mike, was to encourage amateur radio operators to activate sites where members of the military once sent coded messages to the troops by reflecting sunlight off mirrors. Other club members soon expanded the program's scope to focus on a broader array of historical sites. What was renamed History on the Air soon morphed into Heritage on the Air, the program as it is known today. Using a spreadsheet developed by Steve Brooks, Zulu Sierra 3, Sierra Bravo, activators and chasers alike keep track of their contacts and ultimately their cumulative score, which they submit at the end of each year. Organizers believe that the exercise offers a great opportunity to learn about history, either by chasing, activating, or proposing new sites for inclusion. Proposals are required to be well-researched, applications that explain the historical significance of the location, which must be connected to war, telecommunications, or general history. The sites must have a significance dating back at least 75 years. As for modes, well, that's a nod to history too. Operators can use SSB, AM, FM, CW, and yes, even heliographs.
The World Meteorological Organization has confirmed that a 515-mile-long mega flash of lightning that spanned 5 states in the Great Plains has set a new record for the longest lightning bolt ever recorded. The lightning bolt zipped across 829 kilometers from eastern Texas through Oklahoma, Arkansas, Kansas to near Kansas City, Missouri, in 7 seconds, beating the previous record of 477 miles or 768 kilometers. The previous world record recognized by the World Meteorological Organization was a mega flash on April 29, 2020, extending 477 miles across the southern United States and the Gulf of Mexico, the researchers said. The flash, a term for lightning inside a cloud that does not hit the ground, moved from northern Texas into Missouri and was part of a mesoscale convective system, a large complex of thunderstorms, on October 22, 2017. Although the new lightning flash is older than the previous record holders, it was only recently discovered and is one of the first megaflashes observed by NOAA's GOES-16 satellite, which has made detailed information like this available to scientists for almost 10 years. Another world record the World Meteorological Organization maintains is the greatest duration for a lightning flash, which was 17 seconds long and occurred on June 18, 2020, over Uruguay and Argentina. They also keep records for lightning deaths. In 1975, 21 people were killed by a single lightning strike in Zimbabwe. Indirectly, 469 people were killed in Egypt in 1994 when lightning struck several oil tanks, burning the town to the ground.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copies sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon. This Week in Amateur Radio is heard on nets and repeater systems all around the U.S. and around the world on great operations like WA0RCR from the center of the U.S., Wentzville, Missouri, where This Week in Amateur Radio is proud to be part of the legendary Gateway 160-meter net report each weekend. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.